Tommy! Tommy, can you hear me? It's Simon Redden. I imagine I've got about an hour of power on this kit, and then the very tiny remainder of my life is going to be spent in the bloody Stone Age. There you are. Yes, I can hear you, dear boy. Very well, then. An oral history of how we all died. Maybe the evolved cockroach people would like it in a couple of billion years. Now, do excuse me if I ramble. It's been a trying few days, and I'm about to light up a rather large marijuana cigarette I looted from the corpse of one of my staff. Remember in the Old Testament when Moses kept disappearing off up that mountain because God wanted to chat? And Moses' people got so angry about not having a constant representative of divinity, by which I mean old Moses, that they built their own god instead? You remember some bastard hacked together a golden cow and said, "Okay, this is our god now, and everything will be fine"? That's how we work. The whole of religious history is about us trying to build amazing creatures that will save the world. So that worked out all right then. Some say we're actually hardwired for religion. We look for something to worship. Years ago, I read this interview with the author Whitley Strieber. And at the end of the interview, he rattles off all the religions he'd been part of or participated in to that point in his life, including having experimented with worshipping the earth. A few years later, he began writing alleged non-fiction books about great and powerful creatures who came down from the heavens to essentially take over his life. That's us. We're hardwired for the need to fashion gods. Great invisible space daddies that will descend from some place beyond the sky to tell us what to do and make everything nice. Messiahs dressed in human form that will save us all. That's rather nice, you know. Anyway, that's all the great superhuman projects of the 20th century were, Tommy. Oh, we tarted them up with rhetoric about arms races and weapons gaps and projecting force, but really... And you must understand, Tommy, that we British were the first to make one. What do you... Oh, no, we were way ahead of you Yanks. This was long before you got your hands on Jerry Craven. You see, you had poor old Von Braun writing papers and plans for donkey's years, but you never let him build any rockets. We, on the other hand, had M16 photographing all Von Braun's work and bringing it home to Blighty. In 1955, Tommy, we had a working space vehicle with a nuclear engine, test-fired in some remote rural location that strangely produced a great many children with fins and flippers. Now consider, what are the conditions in which a human transforms into, or gains the aspect of, something more than human? That's right, you don't know. Nobody does. My point. Space itself was as alien and transformative an environment as we could imagine. So yes, in 1955, firing a crew out into deep interplanetary volume and leaving them there for a while to see what happened seemed like as good a method as any. We had no interest in public involvement in what came to be called the space race, you see. Britain was a rather secretive place back then. We liked the idea of doing this without anyone being the wiser.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1...
Our jet technology back then was so good that we didn't even have to light the orbital stage until 60,000 feet or so. We were stealthy, us. And we'd had a superhuman project in place since, 47 or so. Project Lunasa. Named for the Irish holiday when the god Lu declared a wake for his dead mother and a feast for the task that killed her, clearing the plain of Breg for planting. After the war, the plains of Europe were certainly well cleared, Tommy, old boy. The crew? 2 men and 1 woman for the sake of variety, covering our bases, a random stab in the dark. Out there for 7 days, on a looping trajectory taking them 1/8 of the way to Mars, in a vessel with, shall we say, non-maximal shielding, just to see what might happen to them out there in the unknowable heavens. They arrived home some 3 weeks later, on a remote Norfolk beach. I say they, which is technically correct. Our expectations were both confounded and exceeded. Something had indeed gotten through the shielding, but it wasn't cosmic rays or unknown space radiation. There are things out in space, Tommy, just waiting to bond with the human form. Possibly even waiting to complete us. Mushroom spores are capable of surviving in space, you know. Our International Space Station even had a mushroom infestation a few years back. We had a bunker under what was then called the Wind-Scale Nuclear Power Station cleared for our use. And we bent our attention to understanding what we had made. Our superhuman. Morrigan Lugus, it was named. The names of 2 ancient Celtic 3-headed deities. All 3 of our astronauts, fused together with alien mycological mass. Sometimes it spoke, using sound.
Empty is thy hand.
Sometimes it would communicate by emitting radio signals. On other occasions, it would eject spores, a 4-phosphorylated indole full of digital code. And the Lunasa team's response to this creature in their midst was instant and profound. They began to worship and to pray and to masturbate with an entranced and furious intensity. One poor old man found new strength, such was his devotion, and tore his own todger entirely off. Mushrooms began growing on it, almost immediately. For 60 years, the chief function of floor security was to prevent maddened scientists from attempting to have sex with Morrigan Lugus. They'd always get their bell end stuck in the mushroomy bits, you see. Morrigan Lugus was a terribly laid-back deity, to be honest. It doesn't take a genius either to realize that mushrooms only grow on dead things. But it could think. My God, it could think. Sometimes I think it was a mycological computer on a meat substrate. Strangely, there was never any thought of deploying it as a weapon. Something about it, not sacred as such, but one could certainly never have conceived of placing it in harm's way, let alone asking it to wage war. One simply wished to, breathe it in. Or have a good hard wank, obviously. Morrigan Lugus was the first. And the last. Well, that's where the real trouble started, isn't it? Krishna. The bloody Indians, of all people, somehow running a superhuman development project for 20 years. Astonishing foresight, really. The rest of the world was still breathing out after the Cold War. But the Indians were looking ahead to crises within the first 10 years of the 21st century. Mind you, India did have some unique pressures, like fitting all its people somewhere and not choking on its own waste products. 1,000 Indian children per day died from sickness related to the pollution in the river Ganges alone. It's fascinating to me that they made this incredible sustained effort to build their own salvation. The blue skin, according to the documentation that was stolen, came from some foul-up in the genetic sequencing. I don't believe a word of it. But you know, the actual cloning had been done 18 years earlier, long before Dolly the sheep. So you have to give them credit for having a live subject at all. Even more fascinating to me was their generation of a rudimentary artificial intelligence. Horribly crippled, of course, an idiot savant machine sentience. Oh, you know the paradigm, Tommy. An artificial intelligence, or intelligent agent, is a system that perceives its environment and takes actions which maximize its chances of success. Now imagine infesting an optimized human clone with that agent, in the fervent prayer that the result will be a superhuman intent on saving the environment to prolong its own life. I mean, assuming that selfishness tends to win out over altruism, orders. And the fabbing machines, my God. Allowing the AI to design and fabricate technological enhancements for its human mount. Mind you, I say mount. There's a lot of evidence that Krishna was a fused personality, man and machine. Did you know, Tommy, that according to the Bhagavata Purana, Krishna was born without a sexual union, by mental transmission from the mind of Vasudeva into the womb of Devaki? Krishna's son, eighth and most beloved avatar of Vishnu, didn't you ever... They were rebuilding their most treasured manifestation of God on Earth. A cloned, designed body, infected with tailored bacteria that excrete metal, controllable by the AI net so that it could grow its own circuitry. And he arose, taking in as much information as the world had.
Maharshi Mahesh Yogi celebrates Krishna. Totality celebrates totality. What is totality? Totality means I'm abstract, I'm concrete. One and many, point and infinity. And the dawn of it in the awareness of the human being is the awareness of totality.
He spoke to them for days. They'd filled the AI net with all their scripture, of course. But Krishna was saying things that had never been written. It was quite beautiful, I've been told. He had them all in floods of tears for days, dispensing the most perfect wisdom imaginable.
Maharshi says that love is the delicate impulse of totality, and that totality of life is associated with the Almighty God.
And he went to work to save India. Oh, excuse me a moment. I'm suddenly terribly hungry. I should make the most of this, really, shouldn't I? Now, from what we could discover, Krishna had in fact been successfully imprinted with the desire to save India. The one question no one asked themselves was, how exactly would he do that? India's a wonderful place, you understand. Nothing against it myself. But it was also fucking filthy. And massively overpopulated. People shat in the Ganges, for God's sake. I think perhaps you might want to clean up my language. I'm a little bit stoned, and I don't think posterity should be subjected to the sort of words I learned from soldiers. I actually edit out that bit about me learning things from soldiers, too. As I was saying, Krishna decided that the first stages in saving India were to take some pressure off the population, get rid of some old infrastructure, and clean the Ganges. It didn't take long for it to get out. It took a little longer for people to grasp what was really happening, at which point I imagine everyone in the world got on the phone to Pakistan. Not that it could ever have done any good. Pakistan has long been a hollow state run by a handful of desperate murderers surrounded by Taliban sympathizers and terrified of everything. And possessing around 200 nuclear warheads spiked with tritium to boost yields into the 500 kiloton range. That's 33 Hiroshimas. All of which they launched at India. Suicide, of course. Life in Pakistan would have been untenable next to the radioactive lava pit they intended to reduce India to. Desperate. Something awful was loose. Terrified. I can't imagine what it would have been like in their command center. When the missiles turned back on themselves. This was, in fact, the hard swallow for the rest of the world. The understanding that a superhuman, by definition, does not think like us. And certainly does not act like us. Reportage from the border indicated that some people were actually cut in half when the war went up. A wall 10 miles high, wrapping exactly to the border of Pakistan all the way around it. To this day, we still haven't boiled Krishna's wall down to less than 4 or 5 good theories. All we know for certain is that Pakistan was fenced in when her 200 nukes came home. And that the wall somehow processed out all the radiation. But it was a wall, not a box. And those millions of tons of pulverized dirt and building and human and animal and plant all funneled straight up into the atmosphere. Nuclear winter.
On one side, Maharshi explains, Krishna means black. Black means nothingness. On the other side, everything else is a manifestation of this nothingness.
Krishna didn't especially care. The planet could stand to cool down, and he had other work to be getting on with. The re-engineering of India. But for everyone else... well, you know what it was like, Tommy. And our eventual audience will have access to better records about Fimbulwinter. I was the one who attached that term to the long winter, did you know? That position paper that got leaked, I wrote it. Fimbulwinter. 3 winters without a summer. The immediate presage to Ragnarok, the final destiny of the gods. Hence, it all kicked off. Iran actually never meant to use theirs. They were genuinely attempting to construct an angel. Their superhuman, named Malak al-Maut, was constructed on the scriptural understanding that such a creature could not, in the earthly order of things, have free will. and therefore would attain a direct connection to the mind of God. Because this was what passed for logic in the 20th century. I mean, perfect example. Somali Puntland, a pirate state, you remember. Do you know where the word Rastafari comes from? From Ras, an Ethiopian title equivalent to Duke, and Tafari Makonnen, the pre-coronation name of Haile Selassie I. A bizarre confluence of Puntland pieces of 8 Korean scientists with things to prove, and some remarkably determined Rastafarian engineers. Ras literally means head, you know. I believe not even you Yanks were aware that in the depths of Puntland, Haile Selassie was being fitted for a body more suitable to his status as Rastafarian Messiah. You were a little busy at the time, you Americans. Off to your Sonoran desert, where you kept the greatest of all American secrets. Off to commune with your super god. Oh, yes, we knew all about Undertown, Tommy. We knew what you had to do to keep your Messiah calm. We knew entirely too much about Jerry Craven. We always knew he'd be the death of us.
I always wanted to fight crime.
Talking about crime, did you ever find out how the Chinese one was built? They were going to use criminals to... Hold on. Oh, no, you bloody don't! This is my stuff, do you hear me? Fine! Clear off and die on your own! Grasping bastards. There. I'm a terrible shot, so I have to use an Uzi. It's like a garden hose, only with bullets. The Chinese one. Nominally, the People's Republic of China is atheist. But I have to tell you, a surprising number of their state scientists still think in terms of things like qi. Made for a very strange project. Infinite money, rigorous authoritarian logic, and mad shit from the dawn of time. Did you ever see photos of their works, Tommy? Huh? You Yanks really were rotten at the whole spying thing in the end, weren't you? But they didn't really have the technology for the thing until 1990. Mega Reactor Buddha's Spine. It was hard to miss. Theirs was named Maitreya, a subject enveloped by scanning, tunneling microscopes wired into his visual cortex. Forced to meditate upon his own atomic structure until he could perceive the quantum foam of every particle of his being, birthing and annihilating under the uncertainty principle. His emergence into superhumanity was heralded by the impossible light of zero-point energy, accessed from the spaces between virtual particles. I'm told it could have gone better for the witnesses. The Chinese filled a warehouse with political prisoners and told Maitreya to kill them to demonstrate his power over space-time and matter. A weapon's taste. He instead fashioned the guards into a vast musical instrument of entrancingly beautiful tone. then configured all the officers and scientists into a self-supporting worm-like structure and fired them into space using the musical instrument. Where they journeyed as a biological probe of brains linked in parallel that reported information about the solar system back to Maitreya via quantum entanglement. Until the structure starting to break up was identified as Comet Shoemaker-Levy, and eventually smacked into the surface of Jupiter. Terrible, really. Penny rode up. I believe we'd reached the point in my bedtime story for the world where Pakistan was an atomic bog and Krishna was saving India by killing a great many people. I need to drink this more slowly. Might be the last of it. So, ultimately, no one could contemplate dealing with Krishna through nuclear means. But Krishna had to be dealt with.
Everything is a manifestation of this nothingness. Krishna is the reality, absolute union of everything. An absolute union of everything means everything.
Even though he somehow processed out most of the hard radiation from the multiple detonations, he couldn't, or didn't, do anything about all the shit that flew into the air. And for that alone, people wanted revenge. Especially Iran. Malak, however, had driven much of his support team to atheism, despair, and suicide. Not only was he clearly not connected to anything like God, but reportedly the fucking thing would not stop talking.
To the north and to the south I show a sign proclaiming, death to the weakling, wealth to the strong. Open your eyes that you may see, O men of mildewed minds, and listen to me, ye bewildered millions. For I stand forth to challenge the wisdom of the world, to interrogate the laws of man and of God.
That said, we still don't know what the thing's internal power source was. He may actually have been a conduit for something unnatural. Who knows? Who even cares? Someone said he shat radio waves. I don't know how you prove something like that.
I request reasons for your golden rule, and ask the why and wherefore of your 10 commands. Before none of your printed idols do I bend in acquiescence, and he who saith, thou shalt, to me is my mortal foe.
My point, you see, is that there was very little effective supervision of Malak at that time, and that the thing was essentially toxic to human life. But the really odd thing about Malak, given all that, was he'd shown no interest at all in the outside world. Silly place to put a secret underground lab, I thought. Yes, Tommy. I bet you did wish you'd had satellite coverage of Tehran that day. Darn those pesky atomic death clouds. I don't know. Lab-perfected pinnacle of human evolution, and it couldn't operate a bloody door handle. And so Malak left Tehran. We can only presume that he knew something had changed, and it concerned him enough to investigate. Was it the radiation, a temperature drop, perhaps the change in air quality penetrating even his subterranean cage? Or did Malak, like Morrigan Lucas, simply sense a competitive or sibling presence in the world? If only we had any idea at all about their minds. Do they think like animals, or God's computers? All we know is that Malak began walking towards Pakistan, which threw everything into even deeper chaos, because it presented too many options. Let him go and see if he can kill Krishna? bomb him before he got there? Or... I'm calling it him again. Sorry about that, Tommy. Human failing. Anthropomorphizing something clearly inhuman. But you and yours have always been guilty of that, haven't you, Tommy? Talking about Jerry Craven like he's a real boy. I mean, what were you people thinking? Yes, we used astronauts too, but we didn't spend extra money on transforming them. $6.5 billion. In 1973 money. You could have just bought a few countries for that and ground the indigents up into gunpowder. And you're oh so clever. Dear me, our astronaut crashed into an experimental space vehicle scam. I don't know. Would it have been so hard to quietly disappear him into a Black Ops operating theater? You can't even do secrecy without big flamboyant publicity, can you? You had to kill him in public. We were impressed, I must say, by your miniaturizing technologies. A good 30 years ahead of your time. And the stem cell budding points on the crude artificial nervous system you built was inspired. And we all had a good laugh when British intelligence liberated the first of the post-op interview tapes.
I'm dead. I know I'm dead. And what I'm trying to work out is why you're all here too. What makes you think you're dead, Jerry? I know I am. I can move my body. I can command it. But I can't feel it. I'm inside a dead body. You know what I hate the most? I was a good guy. I really tried, you know. I was as good as I could be. But I'm not in heaven. What did I do wrong?
Your solution was of great interest to us. An underground American small-town heaven. The kind of place an all-American dead man would hope and pray to fetch up in. I like to imagine him there by his little picket fence in front of his little house, breathing in the air conditioning of his little heaven. Never questioning his existing without eating, drinking, or sleeping because he thinks he's dead. Perhaps he thinks of the days he visited Earth. Imagine a man who thinks that America has actually made contact with heaven. A man so unhinged in his quiet and polite way that he believes the U.S. military can travel to heaven and take him out for day trips. He never questions the technology required to travel from America to heaven. He just some days goes out to the yard to wait, knowing the car's going to come for him. It's happened before, of course. Tommy, stop sounding so nervous. Of course we knew about Granada. And Novaya Garage, the Russian. What was the cover story again? Cuban workers building an airstrip, Granada about to go Soviet? I was so often amused by the idiot lies we've told people over the years. The Russians were staging Novaya Garage there. They knew by the radiation signature. Satellites could spot it from geostationary orbit. How much did you tell Jerry Craven, Tommy? Was he given a cover story too? Did you trust to his delusions of heaven, hell, and big American cars that could traverse them all? Did he know in the Granadan jungle in 1983 what Novaya Garage even was?
Они сделали из меня машину войны. Мое сердце — ядерный реактор. У меня было имя, но я его не помню. Я не боюсь смерти, потому что я давным-давно уже мертв. You and me both, Ruski.
A dead astronaut versus a dead cosmonaut. The first meeting of nuclear-powered humans. That would have been a sight to see. Mind you, the compression wave caused by their first exchange of blows would have imploded the eyes of anyone in a 1-mile radius. The view from space was fun, though. Novaya Garage was, of course, from an earlier era. Not as early as Morrigan Lucas, but very much a product of the early 1960s. Jerry Craven was built fully 10 years later.
Я не боюсь смерти. Make your peace with God, Русский. Спасибо. Слава Отцу, Сыну и Святому Духу, ныне и присно во веки веков. Аминь. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй.
We still know very little about Novaya Garage, comparatively speaking. But we can safely infer the poor bastard was obsolete long before he met Jerry Craven in Granada. I do hope these weren't out of date. I mean, I'm unlikely to find a chemist shop open right now. Obsolescence was uppermost in our minds once we really started considering the Indian problem. You were obviously going to send Jerry Craven into India to kill Krishna. Not that anyone aside from us, and possibly the Russians, were really aware of that. Here's what interested us. Jerry Craven may well have been a human atomic bulldozer, but he was a human atomic bulldozer from 1974.
Diversity unified, unity diversified. Both these things together are Krishna.
And a few things have changed since then. Did you hear that? Good old Big Ben striking the hour. I'd totally lost track of time. I have to take my special tablets now. I often wondered, you know, how you seemed to know nothing about Dajjal. No, Tommy, that was right under your noses, and paid for with American dollars. You people slipped up on that one. Hold on. No, I just realized I haven't taken my antifungals today. Oh, we're all on them down at the bunker. Morrigan Lucas sporulates, you see. We kept 3 shifts of heavily medicated janitors down there, scrubbing all the surfaces with brooms and bleach. Otherwise, its spores embed in the walls and furniture and start fruiting up or whatever. Nothing like going downstairs to work in the morning to find a soft table arguing violently with you. And then there were the people who spent 6 months in its presence. The first team, you see, never occurred to them that they were breathing in spores. I should show you photos. I think I have them on a memory stick in the bag somewhere. When they cut old Massey open, they found 3 mycoprotein heads growing in his stomach. Like dolls' faces, carved out of toadstools. By the time I was going down there regularly, we were all on daily antifungal doses to ensure our lungs didn't start muttering under our own breath. I went down there on my own once. I'd been drinking bromide in my tea for 2 months to depress the, unfortunate psychosexual effects of the thing's presence. And I was quite full of sherry. I went down there, full of sherry and anger and, I don't know, the hubris of the 20th century scientist in the middle of the night. And I confronted my God, as it were. And I remember saying to Morrigan Lucas, demanded of it, as if I expected an answer. What are you for?
I am for that thing in your genome that demands it. I am for that thing which keeps you animals alive. I am At most, a slice of monkey suspended within the stuff of universal intelligence. You are a monkey in nice clothes.
In the harsh environment you refer to as a habitable planet, group behaviors are required to survive long enough to procreate. Since you are stupid monkeys, you have no natural affinity for group altruism. And so you have evolved a genetic pump that delivers pleasant chemicals to your monkey brains.
One that is triggered by awe and fear of an anthropomorphism of your environment. Earth mothers, sky gods, bits of bush that catch fire, interesting looking rocks, an oddly shaped branch. You're not fussy. When your brain does this idiot work, you stop in front of that bump or stick and consider it fiercely. Other monkeys will like as not stop next to you and emulate you.
Your genetic pump delivers morphine for your souls. You have your fellow monkeys join in. Perhaps so they can feel it too. Perhaps because you feel it might please the stick god to have more monkeys gazing at it in narcotic awe. The group must be defended, because as many monkeys as possible must please the stick god, and you can continue to get your fix off praying to it. You draw up rules to organize and protect the group. 200,000 years later, you put Adolf Hitler into power, because you are, after all, just monkeys.
I am a thing born of lies. You lied about needing to explore space. You lied about needing an edge in your arms race. Ultimately, I believe you lied about your need for a messiah figure to consider. I am your stash.
Morrigan Lucas never spoke directly to me again. Really, I was lucky I was drunk. I mean, I met one of the Dajjal scientists. What's that, Tommy? Why would I tell you about that? I don't work for the American government. Now, the fellow came through London on a plane once, and our people borrowed him for a while. Dajjal, honestly. Building one of the things in Iraq and naming it after the Islamic Antichrist. Where were your brains? No, that's right. You officially had no knowledge of that subject. You were played quite badly there, old boy. I mean, everyone knew you didn't have a clue what you were doing in Iraq. But allowing one of your own security firms to set up a secret superhuman lab in-country, that was special. I suppose those hardened Iraqi bunkers the news people were always talking about had to be useful for something. As I say, one of the surviving project leaders came through London at one stage. He was, borrowed, and he was caused to speak freely about the whole thing. This was before your rogue players, as it were, decided that giving up was the best policy. Back when the intent was just to blow the shit out of the Middle East and recolonize it afterwards. You might, I think, be surprised at how many of the participants had previously been attached to the ongoing Jerry Craven project. But when things went to hell in India and all,
They just left me out.
No. I can't see you.
But I know you're there listening.
I can see time.
I can see it all around me, rushing up ahead and branching into a tangle of futures.
In a few of those futures,
there are enough remaining sentience in an environment for the development of back-channel remote viewing.
Humans cannot perceive time, really.
They simply move through it. I can see time. all around me. I am perpetually aware of existing in its current. I have been designed to withstand time.
I have been designed to withstand you.
Tactical perception was the buzzword, I believe. Decades of theoretical jiggery-pokery condensed into about 18 months of unsupervised exotic engineering, producing a creature without sanity.
I'm not insane. I'm without sanity. It is said
that human sanity is the best set of reactions to the structure of the perceived world. It is said the map is not the territory.
But if correct,
it has similar enough structure to the territory to be useful.
I live in a world where the territory is not the same from one moment to the next.
He could see emergent timelines, following the theory that each action buds off new timelines in relation to the set of choices following that action. His vision, therefore, was like a worm farm in forced perspective. Nothing but alternating tunnels forming behind everything he looked at. Conscious, but with the decision-making reactive gear of an insect, Dajjal simply careened toward the zone in his vision with the most open pathways. This was supposed to be tactical, avoiding near futures in which he was terminated, his death creating a darkened time tunnel. But Dajjal was timeless. His vision appeared to be geared toward events independent of himself. Also, the doomed ones looked more interesting. Maybe because they were simpler, fewer branches off them as we ran out of options against our future doom.
I can see Red.
I can hear him talking in future time.
Tactical consciousness is better than sanity.
Sanity is for societies.
And if I'm not part of any society, nor would I suffer one to live in my presence.
I stop walking now.
Because all timelines twist.
Towards India.
All eyes were indeed on India. Funny thing, though, was that most people didn't really know what was happening there, not the details. Mad panic everywhere. You might reasonably expect the panic to be especially pants-shitting in Russia, their government having lost their superhuman capability in Granada. But Russia, their strange form of government seemed so mundane to us, didn't it? Part cryptocracy, part kleptocracy, part oligarchy, smeared with the worst a republic and a free market was capable of excreting. Looking back, it was almost as surreal as communism seemed, with its weird fusions of power and crime and corporatism and control. Companies that were nothing but gangs with letterheads and a relationship with a spooky governor, buying obsolete secret launch facilities in Siberia, buying the remains of a superhuman smuggled out of Granada, and spending an awful lot of dodgy money on a new generation Russian superhuman body operation by what was left of the brain of the dead astronaut who drove the original one. Perun, they called it. Why would the rulers of Russia allow something like that to be built by private enterprise, Tommy? Huh? Your people never understood the new Russia. Even as your own people did everything you could to give the vote to corporations, you never grasped the true free market republic that evolved so fast over there. The fusion of the FSB, the Mafia, and Gazprom, and all the rest. This was the Russian ruler. And you can be damn sure they'd build themselves a servant god to protect themselves. To them, launching Perun was little different to poisoning a rogue agent or shooting a journalist. The perpetuation of business. And the business of India. I think everyone still alive remembers the satellite take and the computer reconstructions. The post-humanity of India. Population reduced by 90%. Claim to fame, Tommy. When the first satellite photos of Mumbai came in, I was the first to notice that the new construction seen from space looked exactly like a cancer cell. Now, I'm trying to remember what happened next. Was it, I think that was later. Was it... I'm missing something in the timeline. God, I hope I haven't mixed too many medications. That can be bad for you. I mean, I wouldn't want anything to happen to me. No, really, I think it was... did that even happen? No, I remember now. It was... Eureka! We have to use Morrigan Lucas to speak to Krishna. If it's treating the poor bloody Indians like ants, it's because it doesn't think humans are worth talking to. So we give it something that is worth talking to.
Dr. Redding, before the current situation began, I did speak to you about your mental fitness for work at this facility.
Yes, I'm mad as a hatter, but hear me out. The Yanks will send Jerry Craven from his underground sanatorium. The Chinese will send their boy in. The Russians have Perun en route, I'm sure. Malak's on his way to India. You can be damn sure Dadju's been let out. The Venezuelans have a superhuman program. And not one of them will try to negotiate. Are we in the business of global security or national security?
National, I suppose.
Exactly. All we have to do is have Lugas convince Krishna that it is a being of equal standing, and that we are its protectorate. And then we can just stand back and let them all blow each other's brains out. If Krishna's left intact at the end of it, then we have a deal with Krishna regardless. If any of the others survive instead, we have extant peace treaties with them and an uninjured superhuman of our own.
How on earth do we get Morgan Lugas to communicate with Krishna?
Put Lugas outside. Let it sporulate. Let it open a biochemical line of communication. We talk to Lugas. Lugas talks to Krishna. Somewhere inside that thing is 3 astronauts who remember their duty. It is a Messiah born of human flesh. Space Jesus.
That sort of comment is exactly why I wanted to have you sectioned and buried in a rubber room until you die, Redden.
That was the plan. To take Morrigan Lugas out of the crypt that protected the outside world from it so it could somehow open a parley channel with the thing in India. I prefer modesty in all things, but it was frankly a brilliant strategy. I was quite convinced that I had saved Britain, and was delighted by my own ingenuity. Morrigan Lucas was quite pleased too. I should have been more worried about that.
Слышу голос из прекрасного далека, голос утренний в серебряной росе. Слышу голос и манящая дорога кружит голову, как в детстве карусель. Прекрасно далеко, не будь ко мне жестоко, не будь ко мне жестоко.
You know, I rather fancy going for a swim. Anyway, while we were doing all that, Perun was dropped on India. The Russians, eh? They don't muck about. I saw a demonstration of Perun, you know. Couldn't really talk about it before, since I was being headhunted for a post on the engineering team. Lots of hush-hush, cloak and dagger, being sneaked across borders and so forth. I turned them down, mind you. The food was appalling. In any other situation, Perun would have been a devastating field deployment. Not that the Indian deployment was what you'd call entirely unsuccessful.
Sarvam Kalvidam Brahm. All this is total Brahm, total Krishna.
Astonishing piece of engineering, really. Fitting all that inside a man. Oh, really, there wasn't a man inside there, though. Not anything you'd recognize as human. The chunk of the previous iteration's brain that survived Granada, the part that had learned to interface with mechanical limbs and onboard computers, they managed to clone that part a few times. Perun actually had 4 sub-brains scattered around the container of his body, running his systems or seated as backups. More than any of them, I think, Perun represented the true beginning of the industrialization of human intelligence. Not entirely unsuccessful, as I say. I believe that was the point at which spy satellites could once again get a good look inside India. But I wasn't paying attention at that exact moment in time. I was busy ending the world. The thing was sporulating, communicating by a chemical stream that was molding air currents even as it rose them. Air traffic was shut down due to the freak airstream racing out of Middle England. Our artificial space god was speaking in chemicals. It briefly occurred to me once again that mushrooms only grow on dead things. I wonder if Jerry Craven would have smiled to think of that. A weaponized human. Never more coldly aware of that than when being transported in the belly of a bomber. I wonder at the stories that man must have told himself, just to stay approximately sane. I wonder how he could have justified being taken from heaven to be dropped on the earth like a bomb on Hiroshima. and then being taken back by heaven afterwards. Around this time, the inevitable happened in Somalia. And by inevitable, I mean Rastas plus ganja plus nuclear devices. Almost coinciding with a nuclear event in the Venezuelan Amazon, where the uranium deposits were located. There had been rumors of a Venezuelan superhuman development project called Libertador. One presumes that mistakes were made. Other mistakes? Assuming that Malak walking from Iran to India would move at a human pace, or that he would do human things along the way. Everyone saw the hole he made in Tehran. The hole he made by presumably disassociating atomic bonds in proximate space. Or as one wag in the office put it, killing things by looking at them. It appeared that he could extend that field of destruction around him, and that it tailed behind him somewhat like the tail of a comet is imagined to do. Krishna was clearly more sensitive to incursions on his territory at this point. And this next event pointed up something interesting that was the source of much discussion at my lab, at least for an hour or two. What makes a god? The ability to destroy, or the ability to create? Malak could obviously render things down into a pile of loose atoms just by walking past them. But Krishna walled up a country just by wishing it. That was quite fascinating. You analyzed the event quite closely, Tommy, I know. I would have loved to have seen the figures. Krishna created or moved material faster than Malak's field of destruction could get rid of it. It was almost funny how a creature as powerful as Malak could be so indistinctively and utterly diffused. Almost. In the aftermath, we wondered if Krishna did not predict Malak, and simply used him as a tool in a second phase of his operations. Perhaps the whole thing was premeditated. Perhaps he understood that in panic, Malak would extend the field of his effect to the vastest scale of his ability in trying to save himself. And that was what Krishna required for his next trick. Malak's field of destruction, ramped up to its extreme level, wasn't going to simply shut off on impact. His momentum would carry him straight through the moon, his field coring the sphere. Poor old moon. With a good half of it torn into dust, and the rest of it suffering severe damage to its atomic bonds. It didn't really have a chance, once an Indian god had decided to throw an Iranian devil at it. And, well, neither did we. Not immediately disastrous, of course, as none of the lunar chunks were big enough to arrive on Earth at extinction impact size. But quite a lot of little chunks turned up. There were also, as you'll recall, several significant floods and storms. The temperature dropped quite hard, And I imagine it'll stay less than balmy until what happens, happens. I suspect it was around this time that I decided to leave my place of employment. Honestly, things have gotten a little bent. I can't be certain of some linear time sequences. Chunks of continent falling into the sea. Chunks of moon falling on the planet. A few nukes going off. It was definitely time to be on the move. I had my mobile kit with me, so I could keep tabs on things quite effectively, given the taps and hacks I had in place, which had mostly been instituted to help me keep my job. I always intended to head for London. London still has the best deep-core blast bunkers, and my security clearance could get me into one. But no, obviously it didn't work out like that. But I definitely needed to run away from where I was. The Maitreya movement happened while I was traveling. In Varanasi, some considerable distance from Mumbai, in a pocket on the Ganges that Krishna's reconstruction was only just reaching. Funny thing I saw on the telemetry. India's air really was getting cleaner. Krishna actually had recombined the matter of Indian infrastructure, despite all the fires, the atomized Indians, and the nuke next door, into machinery that could radically improve the environment. He really was going to save India. Maitreya was ultimately a very interesting antagonist for Krishna. Krishna clearly preferred to work with objects, land, inert matter. Maitreya clearly preferred to work with human beings. If we'd just let Krishna get on with it, we could be living in some kind of paradise by now. Isn't that a terrible thought? If only cooler heads had prevailed. If Dajjal hadn't been released. If the Chinese had waited. If good old Jerry hadn't been deployed. I sometimes wonder, if I'd stayed on base, could I have affected things for the better? Could one sane man have really saved the world? I wish you could see the water, Tommy. It looks lovely. And so we approach the end of my tale, Tommy. The forces unleashed had already done untold damage to the environment. The nations these creatures were designed to protect were largely gone, by their hand or others. Our chance for safety and recovery was growing very slim. Very slim indeed. Krishna in the west and Maitreya in the east. Jerry Craven incoming from across the ocean. Dajjal still the wild card. And our own Morrigan Lugas trying to make contact with one of them, or all of them, through esoteric biochemical means. Have you been in touch with anyone in Australia? It just occurred to me. I know a lot of their towns are coastal, but it's still a long way away. Maybe... Oh, really? Seems to me that cyanide pills or police execution isn't really a situation rich with options. Ah, well. Serves them right for making home and away unto the apocalypse. You know what really surprised me in all this? That the Japanese didn't have some giant nuclear God Jesus death robot up their sleeves. Right up until the end, I really did kind of hope something like that would show up. Still, that's not what you want to hear. Because I'm guessing, Tommy, that a little bird told you we got audio from the theater of conflict. Somehow, Morrigan Lucas began receiving sound from the Indian epicenter. Its mouths became speakers. The rare occasions of speech were even translated. Recorders were mounted, audio was digitally streamed to computers, and I tapped those streams remotely. I also had access to the various satellite techs still operating. We knew Maitreya was building. We also knew Krishna had to be unaware of it. We also reasoned that Maitreya was likely to make its move before Jerry Craven was deployed. We should have realized at this late juncture that neither our knowledge nor our reason had any relevance to the situation. It was out of our hands. Satellite spectrography confirmed that Krishna's new structures were pumping oxygen into the air and eating pollutants. The Ganges and the Yamuna fairly glittered. Glaciers on the Indian side of the Himalayas ceased their retreat. And it was becoming clear that the surviving populace were being, after a fashion, looked after. Early analysis tended toward the interim conclusion that Krishna had intended to only reduce, not obliterate the population, and that India was nothing without her people. At the same time, China had become very quiet. Possibly Maitreya had assembled part of the thing under cover somehow, we still don't know. At some point, faced with some things, questions stop mattering. No one ever could come up with an estimate for the number of people interpolated into the thing. That didn't make them cry or throw up. And then we knew who the new ruler of the world was.
My name is Jerry. I came from heaven. I don't deserve to be in heaven for so many reasons. This place you made, it's like heaven on earth. Or like it could be when it's finished. I could convince myself that I could deserve to live here. I'd love to. I'm supposed to kill you, but I can't see how you've done anything wrong, and I don't want to live in heaven anymore.
Krishna is all silence with the eternal lively potential in it. And this is life.
You took a man, turned him into a superman, and used him as a vengeful god of war, Tommy. I find it oddly comforting that in the end, it turned out that he always knew he was just a man.
Hello. I can see all possible futures from this point. And I have to say, all but one are so boring that I cannot stand to live through them.
I don't know what kind of power source ran Dagel, but it certainly made an impression when he popped it. Well, that was it for China, Russia, most of Europe, really. More than 1 billion dead. All kinds of muck and shit in the atmosphere. Environment utterly buggered. And then finally, things got as worse as they could. I told you, mushrooms grow on dead things. And we let Morrigan Lucas spoil it unfettered. A supermassive mycelial network, mushroom mesh, a microcomputer growing on a continent of corpses. We gave Morrigan Lucas the world. And that, Tommy, is pretty much all I have to say. I do hope that it all recorded nicely for your digital stores down there in that doomsday bunker. I also hope you have an infinite supply of antifungal spray. Me? No, don't worry about me, Tommy. Everyone here in Britain will be dead soon, one way or the other. Morrigan Lucas will probably watch the last 2 people in the country strangle each other to death over a can of mushy peas, because that's just the way we are. And I think it stopped amusing Morrigan Lucas long ago. I do have a theory, though. I suspect that something of us is retained when it invades our corpses and uses us as a substrate to grow more of itself on. I do honestly believe that something of those 3 astronauts we shot out into the heavens remains in Morrigan Lucas. Somewhere in there are 3 humans whom we sought to turn into weaponized gods. And they finally got to smite us. Now, if you'll excuse me, I feel like a swim. And to go to meet my god.